9 South African creepiest case you probably don't know. South Africa is a beautiful country with incredible beaches, the Big Five, great entertainment hotspots, and exciting sports events. Unfortunately, the crime rate here is one of the highest in the world. We have a frightening daily scourge of hijackings, rape, armed robberies, ATM bombings, domestic violence, and murder. Serial murders are not new to South Africa. In fact, the country has the second highest number of serial killers in the world. In this list we'll have a look at 9 of the most evil serial killers that have operated here over the last century. 1. Pierre Bussin. Serial killing, in the headlines this week after the discovery of the station strangler's personal graveyard, is a relatively rare phenomenon in South Africa, police and psychologists said this week. The 6 cases unearthed by the Mail and Guardian show how difficult it is to categorize multiple murders of this type. 2 have a distinctly South African racial theme, 4 were sex killings and 1 was apparently motivated by psychotic greed. According to Playboy magazine, the US accounts for 74% of known serial killers and Europe 19%. The first recorded serial killer in South Africa was Pierre Bussin, believed to have killed 8 or 9 people between 1903 and 1906 in Cape Town. Bussin ran a money-lending scheme, inducing borrowers to take out insurance policies naming him as beneficiary and then killing them. His first victim was his brother, whom he drowned on a fishing trip. When police discovered the grave of his last victim, a German farmer, he committed suicide. His last words to his mother, as the police were excavating his yard, were, "I'm going to get dressed for the police, I have done no wrong." More recent cases are, Simon Mpungose, nicknamed the Hammerman, in 1983, broke into a succession of Mpangeni houses, bludgeoned 4 people to death with a hammer and tried to murder 4 others. His victims were white adults. Mpungose's motive appeared to be racial. According to Ryan Malin, author of My Traitor's Heart, he told an Mpangeni court that he was fulfilling a dream he had had in prison 11 years earlier, in which he grew larger and stronger, broke out of jail and obliterated all the whites in his path. Refusing a defense, he said, the murders, is because of what I have witnessed happening to my fellow black men and also to me because of all that was done to me by the white people." He was executed. Race also appears to have been a factor for Louie van Zyl, a former East London policeman who between May 1986 and October 1989 killed 19 black intruders, and wounded 64 others while working as a security guard for a burglar alarm company. Van Zyl, 39, claimed self-defense during his trial in June 1992. The judge said he had shown a callousness and a disregard for human life, had misled the police and shown a lack of remorse. He was sentenced to 20 years 113 jail for 7 of the murders. Between January and August 1988, 46-year-old David McQuarrie killed 14 black women, after cunningly luring them to an isolated area near Klerksdorp. His trial, on 14 murder charges, was the largest mass murder case in South African legal history. McQuarrie was found to be suffering from necrophilia. There were hints of the ritualism which generally marks serial sex killings. The naked or half-naked bodies of its victims were found covered with twigs. He was sentenced to death. Philip Snye of Queenstown strangled 12 women in 1989, on occasions robbing and raping them. Found by the trial court to be psychotic, he said he did not know why he had committed the murders. Evidence was that Snye was the child of a cruel mother. Parental brutality is a common theme in serial sex killings, with whom he stayed in close touch after leaving home. Jacobus Geldenhuys, 26, the Norwood rapist, confessed to murdering 4 women and a 16-year-old schoolgirl, raping 2 of them, in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg in 1991. 3 were shot in the head at point-blank range. He was also convicted of 2 other rapes in the Rand Supreme Court. He was sentenced to death. Anthony Wessels, a homosexual and former bouncer, killed 3 men and maimed another with the help of his 15-year-old lover. Evidence during the trial was that Wessels derived sexual pleasure from slitting his victims' throats. Described by the court as a dangerous psychopathic murderer, he believed his victims' souls bonded with his at the moment of death. 2. Stuart Wilkin. Stuart Wilkin presents an interesting case, because he killed 2 distinct types of victims. Serial killers almost invariably target victims who share certain characteristics, which may be anything from their physical appearance to their vocation to something as mundane as wearing high heels. They do this because it provides them with an emotional release. Ted Bundy killed young, attractive women. Jeffrey Dahmer killed homosexual men. Andrei Chikatilo killed children of both sexes. Stuart Wilkin killed adult female prostitutes and early adolescent boys. Like all serial killers, there was a deep psychological motive underlying his choice of victims. Port Elizabeth is a large town on the east coast of South Africa, a country known for gold, apartheid and Nelson Mandela. It is also the country with the second highest number of serial killers, after the United States, Pistorius, 2000, although this is a lesser-known fact. By the beginning of 1997, at least 8 people had already been killed by the same man over a 7-year period in Port Elizabeth, or, as it is generally referred to by South Africans. However, no one had connected all the cases. But Stuart Wilkin finally made a mistake. On January 22, 1997, a 12-year-old boy named Henry Bakers disappeared. His mother, Ellen Bakers, was not concerned, as the boy frequently stayed over at his grandmother's house in nearby Missionvale, which is walking distance from their home in Algoa Park. However, when he did not arrive home by Thursday evening, she became uneasy. On Friday morning, she went to her mother's house, only to hear that Henry had left for home on Wednesday. He had been missing for 2 days. The Child Protection Unit was contacted and Sergeant Ursula Barnard began to investigate the case. She discovered Henry had been at his mother's house on Wednesday afternoon, after which he played with a friend at a nearby park. The friend told her that he had to go and buy milk for his parents and later saw Henry with a man called Stuart Wilkin in Dyke Way. He asked Henry where he was going and the man said that it was none of his business. Wilkin was known to both Henry and Ellen Bakers, and had even lived at her mother's for a while after he had had some marital problems. Sergeant Barnard set out to find Stuart Wilkin, which was problematic because he did not have a fixed address. She was informed by a colleague that Wilkin's daughter, Wayne, had disappeared in 1995, and that there were also 2 charges of sodomy being investigated against him. Like Henry Bakers, Wayne was last seen in Wilkin's company. The sodomy charges were filed by his parents-in-law in connection with the 2 sons of his second wife, Victoria. Sergeant Barnard arrested Wilkin on January 28, 1997, and questioned him. He appeared genuinely concerned about the missing boy and eager to help. He told Sergeant Barnard that he had indeed been with Henry for a while on that Wednesday, but he knew nothing about his disappearance. In fact, Wilkin alleged that he had spent the night at a lady friend's house. He was released. The alibi turned out to be false, and Wilkin was rearrested on January 31, 1997. The Child Protection Unit approached Sergeant Derek Norseworthy of the Murder and Robbery Unit. He had been trained by Dr. Mickey Pistorius, South Africa's first psychological profiler, in the investigation of serial murder, which included advanced interviewing and interrogation techniques. Sergeant Norseworthy had Wilkin brought to his office, where the latter introduced himself as Guidi Boer, brother farmer, and the name by which he was generally known. Sergeant Norseworthy sat Wilkin down in a chair facing a photograph of the sergeant's daughter, who was almost the same age as Wayne had been. He left Wilkin alone for a while. Upon his return, he found Wilkin staring at the photograph. Sergeant Norseworthy drew Wilkin's attention to the framed certificates on his wall, signifying that he had successfully completed training as an investigator of serial homicide. Wilkin's eyes found the photograph once more. Sergeant Norseworthy told Wilkin that he knew he had killed the 2 children. He also knew that Wilkin had revisited the bodies to fantasize and commit necrophilia. Wilkin was silent, then his eyes drew on slits and he stretched out his hands. "I am sick," he said. Then, he admitted that he had killed both his daughter, Wayne, and Henry Bakers. In fact, he had returned to the decomposing body of the boy that very morning to have sex with it. Wilkin's full confession revealed disturbing details of his crimes. He told the police that he inspected his daughter's vagina and found that she had been defiled. He told her he wanted to save her from this life and then strangled her. He kept her body, and later her skeleton, hidden behind the Garden Court Holiday Inn Hotel for 6 months. The skeleton was found in 1996, but the police could only now attach an identity to it. Wilkin confessed to murdering at least 10 victims, including his daughter and Henry Bakers. Wilkin was sentenced to 7 life terms behind bars. He is deemed a killer that cannot be rehabilitated, considering that he had shown no remorse, did not look away as very disturbing pictures of the victims were displayed in court, and even masturbated in the court bathroom during his trial. 3. Gert van Rijn. The spiritualist believes Gert van Rijn's victims were buried under a pipeline on a KZN beach. Yet another chapter in the tragic mystery of the 6 young victims of pedophile Gert van Rijn opened on the North Coast last week. A police forensic team spent 2 days digging around a stormwater pipe on Blythedale Beach for the remains of 2, possibly 3, of the victims of Van Rijn and his lover, Joey Haroff. This followed a 15-month investigation by TV program Focus, which uncovered what they believed was compelling evidence. The girls might have been buried there after Van Rijn and Haroff holidayed at the resort. Focus executive producer Ayla Wright, Inset, said a family who had once lived in Blythedale contacted her and said that while they were living there, their 2-year-old son had an imaginary friend he called Sheraton, who told him she had been beaten and assaulted by adults. The father had also seen the figure of a young girl next to their swimming pool, but she had vanished. Van Rijn and Haroff were linked to the disappearance of 5 girls between 1988 and 1990. They allegedly kidnapped Joan Horn, 13, Odette Boucher, 11, Anne-Marie Wapiner, 12, Yolande Wessels, 12, and Fiona Harvey, 12. The girls have never been found. Their last victim escaped from Van Rijn's house in Pretoria and alerted the police. Van Rijn shot Haroff and then committed suicide during a police chase on January 16, 1990, less than a week later. The couple are known to have holidayed in Blythedale and Umdloti. Forensic teams have previously searched both locations, without success. But this year, Wright was told by spiritualist Laurenta Marks that she was sure bodies had been buried near a construction site on or near Blythedale. A search of the archives of the North Coast Courier revealed that when the existing car park and public toilets at Blythedale were being built in 1989, a stormwater pipe had been laid on the beach. The medium believed the bodies were under it. Armed with this information, Wright convinced the police to investigate further. SAP's forensics called in earth-moving machinery to uncover the pipe on Wednesday, after its position had been pointed out by retired municipal engineer Leon Klopper. The team dug further with spades and sifted for evidence, but were hampered by the depth of the sand. Former Springbok rugby captain Gary Teichmann donated 2 more machines, which dug deeper but were eventually halted by a thick concrete slab under the beach. The search was called off on Thursday night, having had no success. Van Rijn had a long history of sexual violence. In 1979, he abducted 2 girls, aged 10 and 13, taking them to Hartby Sport Dam near Pretoria, where he punched them in the face to force them to strip naked and perform sexual acts. He released them in Pretoria the next day, and was arrested and sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for abduction, serving 3 years before being released. Van Rijn met Haroff in 1988, and is thought to have used her to lure young girls for him. Children's Homes reported that she telephoned, requesting to bring girls home for holidays and weekends. The couple applied to foster children, but were turned down. The disappearance of the 6 young girls in 1988 and 1989 caused nationwide alarm. After the suicide pact of Van Rijn and Haroff had been carried out, police discovered forensic evidence and eyewitnesses confirming they had taken the girls. Police searched their Pretoria property and locations in Umdloti and Blythedale where they had holidayed in vain. On March 12, 2007, a set of adolescent bones was found on the beach near Umdloti, about 500 meters from the resort Van Rijn and Haroff had visited. But DNA testing did not identify any of the victims. Caxa News Service. 4. Louie van Zyl. Mass murderer Louie van Zyl walked straight into the arms of his fiancée when he was released on parole after serving 12 years of his 20-year sentence in the East London prison. He was convicted in 1992 of 7 murders and 2 attempted murders. He was freed on Friday. Van Zyl, 53, a former member of the police dog unit and security guard, made world headlines when it was alleged that he had killed 39 people. His modus operandi involved responding to silent alarms set up in business premises, then shooting suspects with his 9mm Parabellum. At one point before his conviction, he admitted to a journalist that he had shot 100 people during his career as a security guard, between 1986 and 1989. His daughter, murderer Sabrina van Zyl, 23, was left behind in the same prison when her father walked free. She is serving a 25-year sentence for hiring a hitman to slit her mother's throat in 2002. She reportedly arranged the murder of her mother, Beverly Vansgore, a Queenstown businesswoman, because she abused her verbally and physically and because she was racist and did not approve of Sabrina's black friends. As the hitman stabbed her mother to death, Sabrina waited in her bedroom with her baby. Before her conviction 2 years ago, Sabrina said she wanted her father to look after her child even though she had at one time stated that he had assaulted her mother and threatened to kill her. Vansgore would not confirm whether he would adopt his 3-year-old granddaughter Tatum. "I will always support my daughter and will try to create a bond with my grandchild," said Vansgore, minutes after his release. "I saw Sabrina on Wednesday. We had a nice chat. She is very excited for me. The bond between us will not be broken." Vansgore's fiancée, Eunice DeCock, 38, is a Cape Town lawyer whom he says he met through the media 4 years ago. She will be his 5th wife. She wore a black suit, seamed black hose and ankle-strap stilettos to meet her lover. The two embraced and kissed passionately before and after a media briefing at Fort Glamorgan prison. "She is a very dear friend of mine. We are engaged and we will see where it goes from here," said Vansgore. "I doubt that we will be living together because she is from Cape Town and I am from East London." Looking fit and healthy and wearing a bright red golf shirt, he said his intention was to go farming. He had studied agriculture in prison and spent his leisure time gardening in the grounds. Reading out a pencil-written media statement, Vansgore said he was happy to rejoin society. "I am hoping that after so many years the public will not judge me on my past but rather on my future. I want to thank my daughters, Jane and Amy, and all the friends who stood by me through the last 12 years. He also thanked prison personnel. "I have no words to describe how I feel and am very excited to see what comes my way. I am planning to write a book about my life." He initially said he had nothing to say to the families of the men he had murdered, but eventually said he wanted their forgiveness. "To the families and friends of my victims, I apologize if my action caused any hurt and discomfort." A prison official, Phineas Mauna, described Vansgore as a model prisoner who showed leadership qualities. 5. David Randolph, Johannesburg, a 45-year-old serial child rapist and murderer was sentenced to multiple life terms by the Modimolle Circuit Court in Limpopo on Tuesday, National Police said. David Randolph was sentenced to 16 life sentences plus 220 years imprisonment for a series of murders, rapes and kidnappings he committed between 2004 and 2008, Director Sally de Beer said. Randolph was convicted on 10 counts of murder, 17 counts of rape, 1 count of indecent assault and 18 counts of kidnapping. There was only 1 count of rape for an adult female, de Beer said. He was arrested on May 16, 2008, after an intensive police investigation, during which over 550 DNA samples were tested, before a police forensic expert identified the suspect. All 19 victims were kidnapped and raped and 10 were murdered in a crime spree, which devastated the community of Modimolle, she said. Judge Roger Clausen, in handing down the sentence, stipulated that Randolph could not be considered for parole for the next 35 years. By that time, he would be 80 years old. The SABC reported that in delivering judgment, Clausen said the crimes were committed in a horrific manner, and as Randolph made admissions but chose to remain silent, showed that he had no reasons to prove his innocence. Clausen said the state had proven beyond a reasonable doubt he committed the offenses. Recently convicted Modimolle serial killer David Randolph, 45, has committed suicide, said Limpopo police on Monday. Captain Mashadu Malelo said Randolph was found hanging by a sheet from a window frame in the Thohoyandou prison on Sunday. An inquest docket was opened. Randolph was serving 16 life sentences and 220 years, after he was sentenced in the Modimolle Circuit Court 3 weeks ago. Randolph was convicted on 10 counts of murder, 17 counts of rape, 1 count of indecent assault and 18 counts of kidnapping. He had raped and killed a number of children, and 1 adult in the Modimolle area between 2004 and 2008. He was arrested on May 16, 2008 after an intensive police investigation, during which over 550 DNA samples were tested before a police forensic expert identified the suspect. Sapa. 6. Christopher Mwazikode. Christopher Mwazikode, one of KwaZulu-Natal's most notorious serial killers, could potentially be eligible for parole. In 1997, Zikode was given 5 life sentences after he was found guilty of 21 charges of murder, rape, indecent assault and housebreaking with intent to rape or murder. He terrorized the residents of Donnybrook Township between April and September 1995. Many of his killings were conducted execution-style, and Zikode would kill his rape victims and mutilate them. He would break into people's homes and confront them in the dead of night. During the early hours of June 24, 1995, Zikode repeatedly raped a woman and her 9-year-old daughter on the same bed. The following month, he broke into Zainel Kumalo's bedroom while she was asleep. He shot her in the head, then dragged her to a nearby plantation and raped her. These are just a few of the many atrocities Zikode has committed. In 1995, during a 3-week spree, Bonganimfka, another KwaZulu-Natal serial killer, who preyed on women commuters at the Randolph taxi rank, was sentenced to 4 life sentences after pleading guilty to 4 murders, an attempted murder, rape and theft. Mfka would lure women from the taxi rank and promise them work. He then would lead them to a secluded forest, strangle and sometimes rape them. Mfka confessed in detail how he murdered the women, and pointed out where he had left the bodies, which were sometimes found in a state of decomposition. He said he strangled the women because he had lied about finding them jobs, because he was unemployed himself. Dheeraj Naidu, a former teacher, was sentenced to death in 1994, but had his death sentence replaced with life in 1999, by the Supreme Court of Appeal. Naidu was jailed for the murder of his wife, Emerita, and daughter, Prashana, 7. He was said to be a sole beneficiary of his wife's insurance policies, totaling R1 million. Naidu, too, is potentially eligible for parole. Biki Mazibuko laughed as the judge handed down his sentence of life imprisonment for the murder of Durban businessman, Victor Dupreez, and a colleague, David Butson, in 1994. The two had gone to check repair work in KwaMashu when they were robbed by Mazibuko and an accomplice, Ndlin Lambo. Dupreez was assaulted, sworn at, pinned down and shot in the head. Mazibuko and Mlambo then drove away with Butson's car. Soon after, they were arrested and found with possessions belonging to Butson and Dupreez. Mlambo was sentenced to 25 years. Mazibuko and Mlambo had shown no remorse for their crime and were labeled a threat to society. Nkosikana Gasla and Thembelani Sibia were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1999, for the murder of Kranskop timber farmer Friedo Redinger, former mayor of Kranskop. Redinger was driving through his plantation when he was stopped by Gasla, ordered to get out of his vehicle, and was shot through the back of his head with a homemade shotgun. Redinger was robbed of his car, farm radio and cell phone. Sibia and Gasla were members of the Community Police Forum at the time of the murder. 7. Bolani Mabhei. Mthitha, he has cracked some of the most serious criminal cases in the Eastern Cape, including the arrest of a serial rapist in Mzamba, who raped and murdered women and removed their wombs from Modi. But the arrest of Bolandi Mabhei, the monster of Thulani, proved to be the most daunting for Captain Aaron Hanise. This was a very difficult case. People had no clue who was terrorizing the community, he said. Mabhei operated in the Eastern Cape, preying on victims in Thulani, a place that became known as the Village of Death. The village lies along the N2 freeway, about 15 kilometers from Butterworth, a town situated between East London and Mthitha. It's a small village. Herds of cattle, sheep and goats graze on the vegetation growing in the almost barren landscape. There aren't many jobs around and most people just keep livestock or do odd jobs in the village or town, said Namfundazom Ponchain, an activist whose house was used as a victim support center for traumatized relatives and other frightened villagers during Mabhei's reign of terror. There are abandoned and dilapidated buildings interspersed with brightly painted houses. The deserted houses belong to Mabhei's victims or their relatives, an eerie reminder of his trail of destruction. It was in June 2010, after the murder of Sinazome Becky and her 2 grandchildren, that Hanise was tasked with tracking the perpetrator, behind a string of murders now believed to be linked. The 3 killings brought to 8 the tally of murders that were believed to have been committed by the same perpetrator. Authorities were for the first time admitting that they were looking for a serial killer. Hanise and his team of detectives initially put up a R250,000 reward for an arrest leading to a conviction, but nobody came forward with any helpful information. We called the psychologist's office to help determine if we had a serial killer on our hands. They confirmed that, said Hijackings. DNA samples were also collected from some of the village residents with previous rape convictions in the hope of finding a link. It came to naught. The case stalled, and so provincial police management initiated a strategy called Operation Good Hope, drawing on police from various units including the Organized Crime Unit, the Dog Unit and Forensic Divisions. The joint operation made its first move on May 17, 2010, when hundreds of males over the age of 16 were rounded up in an early morning blitz in the area. They were taken to a local church, where they had their DNA samples and fingerprints taken. McQuarrie was among them. But his fingerprints could not be lifted as he did not have an ID document. The police focus did not deter McQuarrie. He continued with his killing spree, murdering 5 more people over the next 13 months. The breakthrough, when it was finally made, came as a result of McQuarrie's indiscretion rather than good detective work. On August 11 last year, McQuarrie murdered Nofumsel Florence Lubimbo and accidentally left his shoe at the crime scene. It was a mistake that led to his arrest. We were looking for another person, who happened to be his, McQuarrie's brother, the late Sayabanga. Incidentally, we got him because of the shoe we found on the crime scene. It matched the one he was wearing, said Hijackings. The saliva that had been drawn from McQuarrie during Operation Good Hope proved indispensable. His DNA test results linked him to the string of murders. It was a huge relief when he was arrested. "I can gladly go on pension now," laughed Hijackings. As McQuarrie began serving his life sentence in prison on Tuesday, residents of the village he terrorized for so long said they continued to live in fear. Many believe McQuarrie was not working alone when he committed his crimes. When he testified in court, McQuarrie, always said we when he answered questions. Who else was he referring to? Asked Shane. By that time, the monster had already murdered 15 victims. He simply carried on and killed 5 more people before he made a mistake. Leaving his shoe behind next to his last victim meant the end of his reign of terror. In 2012, McQuarrie was given 25 life terms without the possibility of parole. 8. Jack Mogul. I didn't do anything. You know how life is, this is a challenge. I didn't do any of those things. I don't even know those women. These were the words of serial killer and rapist Jack Mogul, before he was found guilty of 52 crimes, including 16 murders and 12 rapes. Judge Franz Kgemo described Mogul as a liar, who contradicted himself numerous times, and tried to shift blame every time he was cornered. I can safely say that the accused was an untruthful witness, whose evidence cannot be relied on. He contradicted himself and came up with new versions. I formed the impression that he was not telling the whole truth, said Kgemo. The state has proved beyond reasonable doubt the accused's guilt. Mogul may have been nailed by DNA evidence, admissions, 2 women who survived his killing spree, and a confession statement he made after the arrest, but it was his fiancée, Maine State witness Charlotte Manica, who put the nail in the coffin with a testimony that contradicted all of Mogul's versions. Kgemo started judgment by dismissing Mogul's version, that police had conspired against him by taking a used condom from his house on the day he was arrested and using the specimen found in it as DNA evidence. This defense is very suspicious, especially because the DNA kit was compiled long before the accused was even identified as a suspect and long before he was arrested. The accused's own girlfriend testified that they were not using condoms, said the judge. The judge also said Manica confirmed that Mogul normally wore a Zion Christian church badge or sangoma beads. That confirmed the evidence of 2 women who said they were tricked into believing Mogul was a prophet sent by God to cure them. They both identified him by the badge and sangoma beads. Kgemo further rejected Mogul's version that police fabricated the contents of his confession statement, calling it a fragment of his own imagination. Mogul killed 16 women and raped 12 in the Lenasia and West Nario area between 2008 and 2009. He was also convicted on numerous counts of theft, kidnapping, sexual assault and escaping from lawful custody. One of the alleged victims was 19 years old, when Mogul allegedly battered her face with a brick while raping her in an open veldt in West Naria. She testified that she had accepted a lift from Mogul and only realized that she was in danger when he took the wrong turn and became aggressive, when she asked where they were going. The woman said after the rape, he left her unconscious and bleeding in the veldt. She only woke up the following day, and crawled to a nearby road where she was able to get help. Mogul allegedly murdered Han Yelani Mangweni, who had testified against him in a RDP house fraud case at West Naria Magistrates Court. He also raped and killed Depuo Mogadi, Amanikazang Sindane, Santo Tsitetsi, Natham Baiza, Depuo Denise, Mamaki Lilo and 9 other women whose bodies have not been identified. Evidence showed that a SIM card belonging to the accused was inserted in the victim's missing cell phone. The accused could not explain how that happened when he was questioned, said Kagamo. The judge went on to say that evidence indicates that the murders were the work of a serial killer, and it all pointed to Mogul. In the light of the totality of evidence, much of which is uncontested, such as the DNA evidence, the admissions and testimonies, it can be confirmed that in all the bodies, except the one of a child, the cause of death was strangulation. Bodies were left in sexual positions, naked and draped, said the judge. On the day he was arrested, the accused displayed hatred for women. He behaved like a psychopath, and even showing his manhood to the female police officer. When he met the same policewoman at the station, he said, "When I come out of here, you will be the first person I rape and kill." 9. Moses Zyl. South Africa's most prolific serial killer to date, Moses Zyl stands convicted of 38 slayings in a series of ABC murders committed between January and October 1995. The crimes received their media nickname from the fact that they began in Atteridgeville, spawning ground for so many South African slayers, continued in Boksburg, and claimed more lives in Cleveland. The victims, all female, were apparently lured or transported to outlying fields where they were beaten, stripped, raped, and strangled with articles of their own clothing. Several victims were found with hands tied behind their backs, and one still wore a blindfold. Many were left with pieces of clothing draped across their faces as if to prevent them from staring at their killer in death. South African authorities, virtually overrun by serial killers in the wake of apartheid's collapse, consulted ex-FBI agent Robert Ressler in their search for the ABC killer. Working in conjunction with Dr. Mickey Pistorius, Ressler concluded that the murders in all 3 communities were linked. President Nelson Mandela was concerned enough about the crime wave to cancel a scheduled trip abroad, appearing in Boksburg with high-ranking justice officials, where he appealed for public help in tracking the strangler. Police got their break in early October 1995, when a Cape Town newspaper, The Star, received an anonymous telephone call from the slayer. He identified himself as the man that is so highly wanted, describing his murders as an act of revenge for a prior miscarriage of justice. As described by the caller, he had been arrested in 1978 for a crime I didn't do specifically, a rape, and spent the next 14 years in prison, where he was abused and tortured by fellow inmates. To make matters worse, the caller said, his parents and sister had died while he was in prison. In retaliation for those wrongs, he explained, I'll force a woman to go where I want, and when I go there I tell them, do you know what? I was hurt, so I'm doing !D now. Then I kill them. When asked how many victims he had killed, the caller claimed 76, twice as many as police had found thus far. To verify his claim, he signed off with directions to the corpse of a lady I don't think the police have discovered. With so many clues in hand, police soon focused their search on Moses Zyl, a 31-year-old ex-convict and youth counselor who had suddenly dropped out of sight. Known to use as many as 6 pseudonyms, he proved an elusive quarry, but a tip directed them to his hideout in the Johannesburg slum of Benoni on October 18. Armed with a hatchet when officers approached him, Zyl wounded one policeman before he was shot and disarmed. He survived his wounds and was soon transferred from intensive care to a military hospital, where physicians diagnosed him as HIV positive. In custody, he boasted of teaching his victims a very good lesson by killing them. Robert Ressler's profile of the ABC killer had suggested the possibility of 2 team killers working together, and police initially suspected that Zyl might be an accomplice of David Silp, linked to a half-dozen murders of women in Cleveland. But Zyl denied ever meeting Silp, and no evidence has been found to connect the 2 men. Silp, for his part, had nothing to say on the subject. He was shot dead in December 1994, reportedly after attacking a policeman on a visit to one of his crime scenes. The officer who killed him was exonerated on a claim of self-defense. A full year passed before Moses Zyl made his first court appearance, on October 22, 1996, formally charged with 38 murders, 40 rapes, and 6 counts of robbery. His trial, scheduled to begin on November 14, was postponed when Zyl arrived in court that morning, his pants drenched in blood. He was rushed to a hospital, treated for an open knee wound apparently sustained at Pretoria Central Prison. When his trial finally convened in February 1997, an American voice expert identified Zyl as the caller who had boasted of his murders to reporters at the Star. Zyl had also confessed his crimes in detail to other inmates, some of whom were curiously equipped with both tape recorders and video cameras, capturing his boasts for posterity. The long-winded proceedings were delayed once again in August when Zyl started vomiting blood from a stomach ulcer, but there was no escaping justice. On December 5, 1997, jurors convicted Zyl on all counts. The following day, he was sentenced to a prison term of 2,410 years.